When I read our text for this morning, memories from my 8th grade mission trip to Nashville, Tennessee came into my mind. As I thought about these memories, I could smell the musty smell of a well-loved, long-standing church building. I could hear the giggles of children as we played games during vacation Bible school. I remember the sound of vacuum cleaners and the scent of Lysol wipes that we used to clean the sanctuary as we listened to the organist practice for a funeral that would happen the next day. However, what I remember most from that trip was the pastor of this church. I don't remember her name, but I remember it was the first time I remember meeting a female pastor who was the head of her church. I remember working in the sanctuary, organizing hymnals, when she came in and she started telling me and my friend Andrea about the history of her church and the community that she lived in and of God. And as she spoke, we found ourselves leaning in closer to hear. She spoke with profound truth that sung the power of transformation. Her words were prophetic and powerful. It changed me. It changed my heart. Through her story and her words, I caught glimpses of God I had never experienced before. A God of liberation, a God of hope. And this hope gripped my heart in a way I had never felt before. And in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same again. Friends, women in the Bible are known for singing about transformation and about the prophetic truths of God. Hannah is one in a long line of women in this biblical narrative that sing into being the truth of God and God's great works. First, we have Miriam, who sings songs of praise and dances after Israelites cross the Red Sea. Then there is Deborah, who sings the song of victory after defeating the Canaanites. Some even consider Ruth's tender words to Naomi as a melodic poem or prayer. And then there is Mary, who sings a song of hope, peace, joy, and love after visiting her cousin Elizabeth. And then there is Hannah, the woman whose story and song we read today. Hannah, who sings again and again of God's transformational power. These are women prophets. These women are prophets. They are truth tellers. Now, so often when we think of prophets, we think of them as biblical future predictors, people who communicate God's grand future plans and also warnings when they stray from God's path to God's people. However, being a prophet means having a close relationship with God. Being a prophet means being able to speak truth about what you experience of God in this world and what that tells everyone else about who God is. Being a prophet is speaking truth about power, truth about hope and justice and transformation. Prophetic words are the words that these women are speaking in our text this morning. These women, including Hannah, they're prophets. In fact, if we need any more explanation in the book of Exodus, Miriam is the first person in the whole Bible to be given the title of prophet. Her words and her prayers and her songs proclaim a deep truth about God and God's relationship with the world. And it is so much like the prayer we read today. Women have been carrying and telling the story of God through song and prayer since the beginning. They have been preaching truth, proclaiming justice, and witnessing to the transformational work of God. And this matters because of what we read about today. We learn that Hannah lives in a society where her status as a human being is highly dependent upon her ability to produce offspring. And this is because of how the passing down of wealth and property worked in her community. The truth is that during that time, all property and wealth were passed through sons. So before Samuel was born, if her husband, Elkanah, were to die, all of his property, all of his wealth would go to the sons of his second wife, Peninnah. And these would be the sons, the people, who would be the ones to offer care and shelter for the women of the family. So it's worth noting that Hannah would have no one to take care of her. She would most likely be on her own without support because she didn't have a child or son. So it's important for us to remember that Hannah pleading and praying for a son is not just about having a child to love. It is also a way for Hannah to ensure her safety and security. For a woman in that time, having a son could mean the difference between having a place to lay your head at night or not. It could mean the difference between having a safety net or being cast out on your own. For a woman, having a son could mean the difference between life and death. So it's important that we remember this because some scholars believe that the story of Hannah is actually an allegory for the Israelite community. During Hannah's time, the Israelites were ruled by a court of judges rather than a king. And they were beginning to feel concerned for their safety because their rivals were taunting them about not having a ruler, a single ruler. And so much like a woman without a child, the Israelites believed that without a king, they could easily be wiped out and no longer exist. While this story is a powerful narrative about women proclaiming God's truth and power, this is also the story of the Israelites' transformation from a small tribe to a great kingdom. However, rather than focusing on the story of Elkanah or Eli, the author of this royal story began with a woman whose womb was closed by God. It is Hannah's experience that is the starting point from which the story of this royal lineage begins. This sounds kind of familiar, right? A few centuries later, we hear pieces of this story again as we read the story of Jesus' birth. We learn about Elizabeth, who gives birth to John the Baptist in her own old age, and we hear Mary sing a song of beauty and hope and truth about God as she carries the divine child in her womb. It's almost as if the birth of a child is a metaphor for divine transformation. The notion that things won't ever be the same again. Remembering God's transformational work in the world is what Hannah, is what Mary, Miriam, Deborah, Ruth, it's what the women are singing about. Their prophetic words ring with notes from what God has already done to beauty of what is to come. Their words ring with battle cries. They sing of victory over enemies. They sing of unjust systems that leave people hungry, being turned on their heads. They proclaim that even those who feel empty and barren will feel wholeness and fulfillment. all of these things, they come from the work of the Lord. These women, Hannah, seeing that nothing that has happened or that is to come can be accomplished without God's love, mercy, grace, and justice. Hannah's words are powerful. They shake the ground. They quell the quivering heart, and they point us to hope. I think the author chose to write this royal story from the perspective of Hannah, because Hannah is someone who gets it. Hannah is someone who has experienced the deep, bone-dwelling knowledge of God in the hardest of times and in the highest mountains. There is this story. There's lots of different versions of it, but this is the one that I know. There's a man, and he's walking down the street, and he falls into a hole, and he can't find his way out. So he calls out to the people walking on the street above. Finally, someone stops, but they can't figure out what to do, so they drop him a bottle of water, and they keep walking. And then the next time someone stops, they give him a blanket to keep him warm at night because he might be down there for a long time. Someone else gives him a journal or a notebook to chronicle his adventures, and maybe he'll write this best-selling novel when he gets out. But finally, he hears a familiar voice calling his name. And he looks up, and it's his friend. And his friend asks, "Hey, are you okay down there?" And the man responds, "Yes, but I would really like to come out now." And then the next thing they know, his friend has jumped in the hole. And the man looks at his friend and he's like, "Great, now both of us are stuck down here." The friend turns to the man and he says, "Yeah, we are both down here, but I've been here before. I can help us find the way out." Hannah and these other women, these prophets, they are people who have been there before. They know brokenness and they know wholeness. They know hunger and they know fullness. They know victory and defeat. And they sing songs proclaiming the truth of God in the midst of all of these things. Their prophetic prayers, their truth, their stories meet us where we are. They share our humanity, and they remind us of the transformational power and work God has already done, and the work God will continue to do. They do not leave us on our own with a notebook or a blanket to figure our own way out of the hole. They offer us wisdom, hope, and guidance, a path to follow as they remind us of God's palpable presence in the midst of all things, as God is working for good. I wonder what it would look like for each of us to write our own prayers like Hannah. What if we were brave enough to try and say our truths with conviction and courage, using our quivering voices and all? What does it look like to share the truth about God when our hearts are breaking? What would it look like for us to tell our stories? What would it look like to share the good news of God's transformational love in our lives? Those moments where they happen and we can never be the same again. What if we wrote our own songs like Mary or Deborah? What would you say? What experiences would you share? who would you write about? What truths about God would you want to tell? Friends, like these women, these prophets, our stories are sacred. Our bodies are divine. Our souls are whole. And our truths are holy. In this season, may we find the courage to sing, to write, to proclaim, and to remember the goodness of God within ourselves and in this world, so that we might remember all the good God has done and cling to the hope and promises of justice, goodness, and mercy and love that is to come. Friends, this tunnel might be long, but the company is delightful. And the music, it's beautiful. So may we continue this journey together, singing and praying and proclaiming God's goodness like the prophets who have come before us. Amen.